Hey everyone, my presentation is on nutrition and athletic performance, and it's based off of the recommendations made in the 2016 ACSM position statement. And these are recommendations for competitive athletes as well as active adults. And the primary goals of a training diet: keep healthy, keep the athlete healthy, remaining injury free, and then maximizing the adaptations to exercise to ultimately improve performance. And the cornerstone of an athlete's diet is actually appropriate energy intake. And that's just meaning getting enough energy to fuel the body optimally and making sure it's coming at the right appropriate times. And this allows for the capacity to meet our macro and micronutrients and then manipulate body composition, which are all important for athletes. Um, just as a training schedule is periodized, so should a nutrition plan be, because our goals are never static. That is going to have variation throughout the year, as well as daily variation and weekly variation. And it's going to be based on a couple different concepts. First of all, the basic energy balance, which is energy intake, so dietary intake equaling your total energy expenditure, and that's just your basal metabolic rate, which is um, your energy at rest, and then the energy to digest your food, and then activity. And then there's a newer concept referred to as energy availability. And this is basically just looking at the energy that's left over after the cost of exercise, and making sure it's enough to meet the needs of the body. And so this is the equation there: energy intake minus exercise energy expenditure, and that's divided by kilograms of fat-free mass. And they've found in research that when there's 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass um, left each day, that's associated with good health and energy balance. But when the calories start dipping below 30 calories, um, that's when there's dysfunction in muscle mass loss, hormonal dysfunction, all those things listed there. And they found this out, first of all, when they were researching the female athlete triad, but they've since expanded that to include males, and that is termed RED-S, which is, I can't remember what it actually stands for. It's something energy deficiency in sport. So those are the couple of things to consider when looking at total energy requirements. And there's some formulas to figure all of that out. The article didn't really go over that, but talked more specifically about the macros. So we'll look at carbohydrates first. And carbohydrates are limited in the body, so they're easily manipulated. And this can be like on a daily basis or a single exercise session. It's very important um, macro because it can be used over a wide range of intensities, because it can be anaerobic or through the oxidative pathways. And so these recommendations are actually for keeping high carb availability during exercise to make sure there's enough carb to fuel it. And that's because it has such a big effect on performance, especially if it's higher intensity. And there is some research that's showing limiting carbs intentionally before exercise or training can have benefits on fat oxidation, like increasing that, increasing mitochondrial enzymes. But they're not sure whether this all transfers over to performance. So the recommendations are really to keep high carb availability. And there's a table there for recommendations just based on duration and intensity. And it varies from 3 grams per kilogram of body weight per day up to 12. So there's a lot of variation. And so these are just guidelines, and it also depends on an individual's response as well. So we'll go over a few fueling strategies for carbohydrates. First pre-event, then we'll go over during the event and post. So the goal of pre-event is to make sure that you are maximizing your glycogen stores in your body before the event. And that's done by reducing your training load over a 24 to 48 hour period. And that just allows the muscle to load up with glycogen again. If it's below or less than 90 minutes of exercise, you're just trying to get to normal levels. So the regular recommendations are good enough just within a 24-hour period. But if the exercise is any longer than that, um, there may be a benefit to carbohydrate loading, and that's 36 to 48 hours of 10 to 12 grams per kilogram. And then there's also a pre-event diet or meal, and that is consuming 1 to 4 grams of carbs per kilogram in 1 to 4 hours prior to the event. And that's to restore, like liver glycogen gets depleted in the night while fasting. And so if there's an event in the morning, that would restore that. And so this meal should also be low fat, low fiber, and on the lower end for protein, just to avoid stomach upset and help with quick digestion. Okay, and then during the event, it can be important to have supplemental carbohydrates, especially when there are longer events, and this can prevent hypoglycemia and can even activate the reward center of the brain. In events that are over 60 to 90 minutes, it provides additional substrate for the muscle. So it's just additional energy for the muscle. But events that are lower, they're finding may have a benefit from just doing a frequent like carbohydrate rinse in the mouth. They call it mouth sensing. It positively affects the brain, can affect like your perception of pain or fatigue and exercise performance. And then these are the recommendations here, just based on the time. If it's less than 45 minutes, there's really no need. 45 to 75 minutes, this could be where mouth rinsing could be beneficial, or other small amounts. Endurance, 1 to 2.5 hours. This would include your intermittent like stop and start sports as well, and that's 30 to 60 grams per hour. And then ultra endurance, so over 3 hours, we're looking at 90 grams an hour. And then post event, sometimes if you have back-to-back training sessions, it could be beneficial to try to get your glycogen stores back up rapidly. And the best way to do that is with 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per hour for 4 to 6 hours. And it would be beneficial to have protein at the same time because that also enhances glycogen storage. Okay, so now for protein. With protein, timing is really important because it triggers muscle protein synthesis. And they used to do recommendations that were based on a daily recommendation of 1.2 to 2.0 a day, which is actually a lot higher than the current RDA, which is only 0.8. But they found that these higher amounts are needed for optimal muscle synthesis. And so new recommendations look more at the timing because the body is very responsive to protein within 24 hours post-exercise, especially within the 2 hours right after exercise. So they're recommending 0.25 to 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight at those meals. And the recommendation is to focus on whole protein sources like whole milk and lean meats. And dairy seems to be one of the best options, at least according to the current research. They need to do more research on other sources like eggs, some vegetarian protein sources, and even beef. If you are not able to get access to whole food, supplements can be a great alternative. So with like the isolated proteins. And then another thing to mention with protein, if total energy intake is not high enough, then it won't go to protein synthesis. And so it's important to have that high enough. If an athlete's trying to lose weight or fat, it's important to up the protein even higher just to make sure there's enough for MPS. And so that would be even higher, over 2 a day. Okay, and then as far as fat, it's important. It provides energy. It's an essential part of the cell membrane and helps absorb vitamins. Most athletes are between 20 to 35%, just like the general recommendations. Less than 10% should be saturated. And when trying to lose weight, this is often the one that gets manipulated. But fat intakes that are chronically less than 20% can cause a lot of problems and are discouraged. You can end up with like vitamin deficiencies and other problems. So with high fat diets, which can be popular now with the low carb diets, they are shown to increase fat oxidation, and so that's why they are popular. However, when looking at performance, those high fat diets can only match the high carb diets at moderate intensities. Higher intensities performance is impaired, and they think it's because the body becomes less efficient at utilizing carbohydrates even when they are available. So you lose that metabolic flexibility, which is not really the goal. And then altering body composition and weight. This is important in sports just because there are certain body compositions that are have a relationship with success and support in certain sports. With that said, it's not recommended to any body type, be recommended to any athlete or group. Rapid weight loss should be avoided, like I said, because that is increasing the loss of lean mass. And on the flip side of that, any inadvertent excess gains. So when off season or when training declines, so should your nutrition intake. So weight loss should happen on the base phase, so not close to competition, and the whole goal should be to preserve muscle mass. And a good way to do that is just 250 to 500 calorie deficit a day and increasing protein above 2 grams just to maintain that fat-free mass, and then maintain or slightly increase activity and try to keep the weight loss to less than 1% per week, because that will also preserve performance. And then as far as dietary supplements, the article just talks a lot about how the industry is unregulated and there's a lot of false claims. And so safety is a huge concern as well, because they do find in a lot of them that there's ingredients that are hidden and not listed on the label, and others that are toxic and listed on the label. So purity should always be looked at. There are third-party certifications that you can look for. And then it just depending on the supplement, it's still kind of controversial about what's ethical and what's not. And so any decisions to do that should be discussed with someone that you can look at the risk and the benefit of taking that supplement. And then a quick note on vegetarian diets. They can be adequate, but they do require a little bit more planning than a traditional diet would, because there is potential for these deficiencies listed here, and also for increased chance of stress fracture. So anyone who follows a vegetarian diet would probably just benefit from having their diet looked at just to make sure they're getting everything that they need. And there's my references. Thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.